Joined from Israel by Dr. Michael Oren, former Israeli ambassador to the United States, former member in the Netanyahu government past. Good morning, Dr. Oren. I would like you to update us on what you think is happening in Syria right now.
What's happening in Syria is the beginning of a new era in the Middle East, Hugh, a new era. We don't know who's going to take charge there. And you and I are both old enough to remember the Lawrence of Arabia movie, probably very politically incorrect today. But you remember when the rebels took over in Damascus and they started yelling and shooting at one another in the room? Somehow that got that image in my head, Hugh. You know, guys shooting pistols in the ceilings, and saying we don't carry water, we don't cut wood. I don't know, all these things that are politically incorrect in my mind. I apologize, but I don't care if Jihad Joe takes over Syria. Anything's better than Assad.
Well, that was my view. My view is Assad killed 500,000 of his own people, drove 2 million into exile, displaced 12 million internally. And I've got Leland Vittert is a friend of mine, but he's saying Assad was a despot. Not sure this is a better option. They've got a video of some jihadi saying they're going to Jerusalem next. I'm not sure that they really talk to me.
Hezbollah withers on the vine. That's what happens. Hezbollah can't be resupplied from Iran anymore via Syria. The Shiite arc that extended, the crescent that extended from Tehran to the Mediterranean has just collapsed. And by the way, I think there's a good chance there'll be an outbreak of civil war in Lebanon now, as the Druze and the Christians who hate Hezbollah are going to start picking them off one by one. Watch it happen. And if we can interdict the chemical weapons, the United States can take care of ISIS. We wish these guys all the best. The idea is they hate Iran. And Iran is isolated, but we have one major worry now, and it's not Syria. Our major worry now is that the Iranian regime is going to break out and create a nuclear weapon. And because they know they
we're also old enough to remember the 1973 war, and that Syria sent tank division after tank division up the Golan Heights and almost broke through. What happened to that army? What happened to those tanks?
It's gone. Melted away. Hey, it's the same thing that happened to the Afghan army, when America pulled out. Things happen very, very rapidly here. But I want to caution you about this idea of that the Iranian regime may conclude that this is their last opportunity to create a nuclear weapon. They're backed into a corner. They're isolated. I want to suggest something that's going to be very radical here, so brace yourself. Iran has flagrantly violated all of its commitments, both to the JCPOA as well as to the international community. It is enriching uranium at 60+%. It has enough enriched uranium for 4 bombs. Maybe Israel and the United States should act preemptively, and not wait for Iran to break out.
Well, that is the only way that Joe Biden actually gets a win on his scorecard, Ambassador Oren. There's nothing on the Biden scorecard. Nothing.
He goes down in history. He's been claiming victory. That he's responsible for what happened in Syria. I can't say he has no responsibility. I think the major responsibility lies with Israel and the fact that we fought a brutal war for 14 months that isolated Iran and destroyed its proxies. I think that's what did it. And sometimes in the opposition to the Biden administration, I think the Ukraine situation also contributed. But at the end of the day, there were only 5,000 Russian soldiers in Syria. There was a huge army there. It was really the breakdown of Hezbollah in Iran. But I think we have to think very, very clearly, soberly about the nuclear situation in Iran, Hugh, and whether the United States and Israel have to act now before it's too late.
I asked Bethany Mandel last hour. I want to ask you, the Israeli media is full of reports of an imminent deal for hostages, which would make sense to me if, in fact, Iran's axis of resistance is in full collapse and the remaining Hamas terrorists realize they got one chance to get a ticket out of Gaza. Is that what's happening?
I would hope so. All we can say is hope so, because we don't know exactly who's pulling the strings on the Hamas side. We don't know if Hamas knows where all the hostages are. Some of them may be in the hands of other organizations or in the hands of individual families. It's happened in the past. We know. We can only hope. And I think, yes, the fall of Assad, the isolation of Iran, the withering on the vine of Hezbollah all contribute to putting more pressure on Hamas to release the hostages.
All right, now the next question, Michael, there are only 2 people in Israel that I can ask this of, you and Haviv Redigor. You both know Netanyahu well. You followed him well. You were in his government at one point. You were his ambassador at one point. Aviv follows him from the outside. And you're not overwhelmed by Netanyahu derangement syndrome, which really exists in
No.
Israeli media. They cannot not talk badly about Netanyahu. Ask them about anything, and they'll end up talking about Netanyahu. Does Netanyahu get credit from the Israeli people for the 14 months of hammering that he has unleashed on all of Iran's proxies?
It definitely does. He definitely does, and his numbers have been going up in the polls. I don't know how he failed in an open election. He's also, testifying in his own corruption trial. That's a sort of a counter image. But what the polls show are very interesting. Always that a majority of Israelis would like to see Netanyahu go at this point, but the same majority of Israelis really can't find anybody who could replace him, and they still think he is the person who's most qualified to be prime minister of Israel. And we got to ask ourselves, okay, October 7th was a failure of colossal, monumental proportions, and there are many things, many issues you can take with Netanyahu about the way he runs his government, the way his interpersonal relationships, certainly. But the fact of the matter is, this man has withstood pressures that I don't think any other human being on earth could withstand over the course of the last 14 months, including immense pressures from our ally, the United States, from the international community. He's got arrest warrants out. He can't visit Belgium or Canada or Great Britain. And he doesn't seem to miss a step. He's not that much younger, by the way, than President Biden. You were showing a picture of him snoozing there. And yet you never see Netanyahu tired.
Let me ask you this. When Netanyahu goes on trial, will the Supreme Court step in to say, maybe this is an important period of time in Israel's history with Syria up for grabs and Hezbollah reeling? Maybe we ought to postpone the trial? Because it does seem to me crazy, absolutely crazy, that he's going on trial this week.
And, well, the Supreme Court already ruled that he has to go on trial, irrespective of the fighting in the South, the continuing fighting in the South, the ceasefire in the North. Maybe the situation in the North, if it deteriorates in one way or another, will lead the Supreme Court to revisit its earlier ruling.
It strikes me as insane. Let me ask you my last Netanyahu question, which is somewhat radical. For the last year and a half, I believe Netanyahu has been the de facto leader of the West. Olaf Scholz is finished. Trudeau is finished. Keir Starmer doesn't know which way the men's room is. We do not have any idea what Joe Biden is doing on any given time, and we don't know if Blinken or Sullivan speaks for him. Japan has been up in an upheaval. Am I right? Netanyahu has been really the only adult on the global stage on our side?
Yeah, I think Netanyahu has been maybe the only leader in the West who understands what this war is about, that this war is a war for the West. And as I'll quote a great writer, Sam Harris, who said, "We're all Israelis now, just not all of us know it yet." And I think that remark was made, that line was given way back in 2023, and it remains emphatically true today. And yes, Netanyahu has led that effort, and in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles, both diplomatic, logistic, the shortage of ammunition. An interesting article in the Israeli paper last week that shows how Israeli emissaries have been scrounging the world, trying to find army surplus munitions and paying, double the price for all of them. It's like we're back in 1948. So this is what Israel had to do in order to win the battle for the West, a battle in which very few international leaders appreciate the role that Israel and, frankly, Netanyahu have played.
And do you think that changes on January 21st? You think the pipeline of weapons opens up again?
I hope so, and I hope there are weapons. There's a world shortage of weapons, but I do hope so.
Okay, now let me close by asking you about Mike Huckabee and the relationship of our ambassador to Israel. You've done the opposite. You've been Israel's ambassador to the United States. How much does our ambassador to Israel matter?
Depends on his relationship with the president. David Friedman, who was very close to the president, and he was the previous ambassador from the Trump administration, was very close and had tremendous influence. I do not know the personal relationship between Mike Huckabee and the president. All I know in general, an ambassador does not make policy. An ambassador carries out policy, but the ambassador could influence depending on the relationship. I always felt that I could go back to Prime Minister Netanyahu and make my case and often get him to change his mind by making a compelling case. You can do that.
Bonus question from a headline that crossed my desk. The Israelis have moved into an area they had not previously occupied in the Golan Heights. What is the significance of that?
Was an area that was negotiated by Henry Kissinger with Golda Meir in January 1974 to create sort of a buffer zone between Israel and Syria. It was an area that had been captured by Israel in 1967. When I was a young man on a kibbutz on the Golan Heights, I used to drive a Jeep on the weekend around the Quneitra, the third largest city in Syria, which was completely abandoned, a ghost city. We had to give that back in 1974 in order to get the buffer zone, a ceasefire. Now Israel has reoccupied that zone, and most importantly, has reoccupied the Syrian summit of of Mount Hermon, and that's the highest point that overlooks Damascus. So it's a position of great strategic importance, and our commandos reoccupied it yesterday.
And has any intention been revealed to stay there for as long as the chaos continues in Syria?
Well, that area was negotiated. That agreement was negotiated with the Assad government. The father of Bashar al-Assad, Hafiz al-Assad. The Assad governments don't exist anymore. So under international law, you made an agreement with a country, in essence, a government that does not exist anymore. So we do not have that agreement has no legal force as far as I know.
All right, but Israel did annex the Golan Heights, correct? But they didn't annex this part of it?
They did not annex this part of it. Yes, in October 1981, Begin annexed the Golan Heights, and then in 2019, President Trump recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. Unfortunately, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal still refer to the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. They have their own
That's
foreign
remarkable.
policy.
They do, and it's often wrong, and they were caught by surprise, like America's intelligence agencies again. Dr. Oren, thank you for joining me early this week. We did want to get it up to the date. You do too. I hope it's a day of celebration in Israel because Iran is collapsing in real time before our eyes.